Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material.
Glad to be here for this one.
So imagine you decide to build the ultimate, pristine, perfectly sealed, climate-controlled biodome.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Right. You construct these impenetrable glass walls, you filter the air, you sterilize the soil, and you do all of this to keep out the messy, unpredictable, chaotic elements of the natural world.
Exactly.
So you sit back, admiring your flawless little universe of pure control. And then you realize with absolute horror that before you sealed the final door, you locked a termite inside.
And that termite is human nature.
It's the absolute perfect image for what we're dissecting today.
It really is, because we carry the chaos inside with us. I mean, the architectural impulse you're describing, that desire to build the glass wall in the first place, it's driven by a profound fear of vulnerability.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if we just set the right rules, if we optimize our routines enough, if we build the perfect intellectual fortress, we genuinely believe we can somehow bypass the fundamental realities of being human.
Which is the entire driving force behind William Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost.
It really is.
In this deep dive into Acts I through V, alongside the critical commentary of the 19th century essayist William Hazlitt, we're looking at the ultimate failed biodome.
We really are.
We're looking at a king who believes he can literally legislate human nature out of existence. And we get a front row seat to the spectacular, humiliating collapse of that project.
It's just a total disaster.
So we're introduced to the King of Navar, Ferdinand, and his opening decree. He wants to turn his court into a, quote, little academe.
Right, and his stated objective is to defeat the huge army of the world's desires.
Which sounds great on paper.
Right, but it's crucial to look at the actual mechanics of the laws he forces his three lords to sign. Baronne, Longueville, and Dumaine.
Yeah, let's get into the rules because they are wild.
They're absurd. They're committing to study for 3 years. During this period, they're permitted a maximum of 3 hours of sleep per night.
Which is just, good luck.
And they must fast completely 1 day a week and consume only one single meal on all the other days.
Wow.
But here's the cornerstone of the edict. Absolutely no women are allowed within a mile of the court, under penalty of losing their tongues.
Wait, let me challenge the premise here for a second.
Yeah.
Because the king is establishing an incredibly strict ascetic lifestyle.
He is, yeah.
But historically, asceticism has birthed some of the most profound philosophical and spiritual movements in human history.
Sure, absolutely.
Monastic traditions across the globe use fasting, sleep deprivation, and isolation to achieve higher states of consciousness.
So is Shakespeare just being anti-intellectual here? Like, why is Navarre's specific attempt framed as so immediately foolish?
Well, that is the exact distinction we have to make, and it really comes down to motivation.
Okay, how so? Shakespeare is not anti-intellectual at all. He is anti-hubris. You have to look at the very first lines out of the king's mouth.
Right.
He isn't seeking spiritual enlightenment or divine communion. He says, "Let fame that all hunt after in their lives live registered upon our brazen tombs."
So it's about legacy.
Exactly. He is trying to cheat death. He wants his court to be the wonder of the world. This isn't a monk retreating to the desert in humility, you know? This is a massive ego project.
He's just trying to brand himself.
Basically, it is an attempt to use intellectual rigor as a weapon to conquer mortality and achieve immortal fame.
So he's pitching, essentially, the 16th century equivalent of a Silicon Valley biohacking retreat.
Yes, that is exactly what it is.
He wants to optimize his way out of dying. And Longueville buys into this delusion completely. He actually says, "The mind shall banquet, though the body pine."
Oh, that line is so telling.
It's this deeply dualistic, almost destructive idea that the physical body is merely an obstacle to the mind. Like if you just starve the flesh enough, the brain will ascend to godhood.
It's the ultimate intellectual arrogance, right? They view their own biology as an enemy to be conquered by sheer willpower.
Right.
But Shakespeare immediately places a mirror up to this absurdity in the form of Baronne.
I love Baronne.
Because Baronne is part of the inner circle, he ultimately signs the oath, but he refuses to pretend the biodome is actually secure.
Baronne is the guy who signs the terms of service agreement,
Yeah.
but is literally the only one in the room who actually read the fine print.
Yes. He points out a massive structural flaw in the king's plan before the ink is even dry.
Because he brings a huge dose of geopolitical reality into this fantasy world.
Exactly. The king, in his rush to become this immortal ascetic, has completely forgotten that the Princess of France is currently en route.
Kind of a big detail to miss.
A huge detail. She is arriving on a diplomatic mission on behalf of her bedridden father to negotiate the surrender of the territory of Aquitaine.
Right, so they're facing an international crisis, and the king's new law literally prevents him from meeting with a foreign head of state.
It's hilarious.
And Biron tells the king, necessity will make us all forsworn 3,000 times within this 3-year space. For every man with his effects is born, not by might mastered, but by special grace.
That phrase, not by might mastered, is so important.
It is the thesis statement of reality crashing into theory. Like, you cannot brute force your way out of your physical and social reality.
No, you can't. And Biron is tapping into the Elizabethan understanding of human psychology and biology there.
Right, with the word effects.
Yeah, the term effects refers to the passions, the humors, those undeniable biological drives that govern human behavior.
And the king actually believes those can just be outlawed.
He believes these effects can be suppressed by the might of legal decree and intellectual study. And Biron is basically arguing that this isn't just difficult. It is biologically and philosophically impossible.
And Shakespeare doesn't make us wait long to see this play out.
Not at all. The laws are shattered almost instantly.
And not by the lords, but by the lowest man on the social ladder. Right. Costard the clown.
Costard is the best. He's described as a rational hind, like a rustic commoner.
Yeah. And the very moment after this grand decree banning women is ratified, Costard is caught in the park with a country girl, Jaconetta.
Of course he is.
The king and the lords are deeply offended, but Costard doesn't apologize. Instead, he uses the mechanics of their own hyper-intellectual laws against them.
It is a masterclass in semantic dodgeball.
It really is. It reveals the total impotence of language to control behavior.
Right. So the king reads the formal legal charge, stating that the proclamation expressly forbade any man to be taken with a wench.
And Costard immediately exploits the taxonomy of the law. He replies that he wasn't taken with a wench, he was taken with a damsel.
And the king, who is getting really frustrated, points out that the word damsel is also covered in the proclamation.
But Costard pivots again. He says, she wasn't a damsel, she was a virgin.
To which the king counters that virgin is explicitly banned as well.
And finally, Costard declares, I deny her virginity. I was taken with a maid.
Which is just brilliant because it totally exposes the Elizabethan obsession with categorizing everything.
Right. They genuinely believe that if you could just name a thing precisely, you could control it.
But Costard proves that human instinct doesn't care about your dictionary. I mean, you can write a 1,000-page legal document trying to outlaw human desire, and desire will simply find a synonym and proceed exactly as planned.
Desire will always find a loophole.
Always. Costard is the termite in the biodome. He represents the undeniable, messy reality of the human condition.
And when confronted with his crime, he simply says, such is the simplicity of man to hearken after the flesh.
He offers no grand philosophical defense. He just accepts his biology as a fundamental, unavoidable truth.
Meanwhile, the lords are tying their intellects into agonizing knots, trying to pretend they don't have flesh at all.
Exactly, which sets up the inevitable, mathematically precise collapse of the little academe.
Oh, the unmasking sequence in Act 4. It is essentially a series of Russian nesting dolls of hypocrisy.
It is one of the funniest scenes in all of Shakespeare.
We watch the king sneak into the woods to read a love poem he secretly wrote to the princess.
Right.
Then he hides as Longueville enters to read his own secret poem.
And then Longueville hides as Dumaine enters.
They all catch each other in this cascading revelation of failure. And finally, Biron, who has been hiding in the canopy of a tree the whole time, looking down and judging them all for their weakness, climbs down to claim the moral high ground.
It is the absolute peak of Biron's arrogance. He berates them for breaking the vows, positioning himself as the only man of true discipline.
And then the universe delivers the ultimate punchline.
Costard accidentally delivers Biron's own passionate love letter to Rosalind directly into the hands of the king.
The moral high ground just evaporates in an instant.
Totally gone. It's a complete leveling of the playing field. Every single one of them is exposed.
And because they are so trapped in their own intellectual framework, they can't just admit they were wrong, can they?
No, of course not. They turn to Biron, who's the most eloquent among them, and essentially demand that he use his massive intellect to construct a legal loophole.
Right. They need him to philosophically justify their perjury.
They need a new theory to replace the old one, and Barone delivers what is arguably the most important speech in the play.
He executes a complete philosophical reversal.
He does. He argues that the original vows were the true crime because they were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how wisdom is actually acquired.
He says, from women's eyes, this doctrine I derive, they sparkle still the right Promethean fire. They are the books, the arts, the academs that show, contain, and nourish all the world.
Let's break down that specific mechanism for a second, because it's so important.
Yeah, please.
He says studying texts in a dark room actually blinds you. He says, light-seeking light doth light of light beguile.
It's a really dense phrase.
It is, but it taps into the optical theories of the time, right? The idea that the eye itself emitted beams of light to see.
Yes, the extramission theory of vision.
Right. The Elizabethans believed that seeing actively consumes your body's energy, your internal light.
So Barone is arguing that if you spend all your time poring over dead texts, like seeking the light of truth in a book, you are literally draining your own life force.
Exactly. You beguile or cheat yourself of your own light. You become blind to reality.
Wow.
He argues that true Promethean fire, the animating divine spark of life and knowledge, isn't found in isolation. It is found in the eyes of another person.
It's a radical shift from isolation to connection.
A total 180.
He claims that love adds a precious seeing to the eye. By engaging the surface, by fully participating in the messy reality of human relationships, you actually gain a higher form of knowledge than you ever could through leaden contemplation.
That's beautifully said. The attempt to become immortal gods through fasting and study only made them ridiculous fools.
Right. Accepting their humanity and their vulnerability to love is the actual gateway to understanding.
But, to truly grasp why Shakespeare embeds this profound philosophical argument inside such excruciatingly dense, almost impenetrable wordplay, we have to pull back.
We have to look at the cultural environment he was writing in.
Exactly. And this is where William Hazlitt's 19th century commentary provides some really essential context.
Hazlitt makes this incredibly acute observation that the style of this play savors more of the pedantic spirit of Shakespeare's time than of his own genius.
That's such a fascinating critique.
It really is. Hazlitt is suggesting that the exhausting, convoluted language of the play isn't a mistake on Shakespeare's part. It's a deliberate imitation.
Right. Shakespeare is holding up a mirror to the fashionable jargon of Queen Elizabeth's court. He's showing the elite audience exactly what they sound like.
And Hazlitt identifies what he calls the pedantic spirit. Can you explain that?
Sure. So the Elizabethan era was deeply influenced by Renaissance humanism, which brought this massive influx of classical texts, Latin and Greek, back into mainstream education.
Which sounds like a good thing.
You'd think so. But rather than using this knowledge to expand human understanding, the courtiers and academics kind of weaponized it. They used obscure vocabulary and complex rhetorical structures, essentially as status symbols. And Hazlitt specifically references the logic of Peter Lombard here.
Let's unpack the Lombard connection, because it really explains the mechanism of how these characters argue.
Yes, let's do that.
Lombard wrote the Sentences, which is a foundational text of medieval scholasticism. It was heavily categorized, endlessly analytical, and just obsessed with resolving minute theological contradictions through rigid dialectical logic.
Exactly. Lombard's method involved proposing a thesis, citing contradictory authorities, and then using these razor-thin semantic distinctions to reconcile them.
And Hazlitt is pointing out that the characters in Love's Labour's Lost applied this exhausting, hyper-analytical scholastic logic to everyday, trivial conversations.
They aren't speaking to communicate truth.
No.
They're speaking to demonstrate their mastery of the intellectual apparatus. It is the ultimate form of performative intellect.
And we see this weaponization of language perfectly embodied in the characters Hazlitt calls the potentates of nonsense.
Such a great phrase.
We have Don Adriano de Armato, his page moth, and specifically Holofernes the schoolmaster.
Oh, Holofernes.
If you want to understand pedantry, you have to look at Holofernes. He is completely disconnected from the actual purpose of language.
He represents the terrifying endpoint of the little academe.
He really does.
He is what happens when the intellect completely consumes reality. There is a deeply revealing scene where he complains bitterly about the shifting pronunciation of English words.
Oh, I remember this.
He is enraged by people who say debt instead of debt, insisting that the silent B must be fully articulated to honor its Latin root, debitum.
He wants people to say cough instead of calf, and hoff instead of half.
Right. He is valuing the dead history of a word over its living utility.
He actually says of another character, he draweth out the thread of his verbosity finer than the staple of his argument.
Which is just the irony, is so thick you could choke on it.
He is using an incredibly verbose, convoluted sentence to complain that someone else is using too many words.
Exactly. And Hazlitt offers a phenomenal visual metaphor for this specific brand of linguistic excess.
Oh, I love this metaphor.
He says watching Shakespeare write this hyper-stylized, pedantic dialogue is as if the great painter Titian used his unparalleled genius merely to paint a full-bottomed periwig.
Or, if Raphael applied his mastery of divine form to paint the flat, stiff figures of a wall tapestry.
Yes. Titian was the master of flesh and vitality, and Raphael the master of grace and perspective.
So Hazlitt is saying Shakespeare has this immense godlike ability to capture the human soul, and here he is using that talent to perfectly render a superficial, artificial wig.
Its magnificent palette intentionally constrained by trivial, hollow forms.
But the crucial point Hazlitt makes is that the imitation is flawless.
It really is.
Shakespeare perfectly captures the emptiness of a society that values the container over the content. The characters are completely alienated from reality because they are trapped behind a wall of their own syllables.
Which naturally begs the question of modern translation.
Right, because we don't argue about Peter Lombard's sentences or their Latin root of the word debt at dinner parties anymore.
No, thankfully we don't.
So how does this 16th century critique of performative intellect actually translate to the way we function today? I mean, I'd argue that our modern equivalents of the little academe are everywhere.
Oh, the mechanism is exactly the same, even if the vocabulary has changed.
Navarre's desire to isolate himself, suppress his physical needs, and grind his way to immortality. That is the direct ancestor of modern toxic productivity.
An extreme hustle culture, yes.
We see an entire industry built on the premise that you can optimize your humanity out of existence.
Right, waking up at 3:30 a.m., taking ice baths, tracking every single biological metric on a smartwatch.
Drinking engineered meal replacements so you don't have to waste time chewing.
The mind shall banquet, though the body pine.
It is the exact same mantra.
We treat the body, our need for rest, our need for unstructured social connection, our need for simple joy. We treat it as an inefficient bug in the system.
We build these strict routines, our own little biodomes, and we believe that if we just stick to the protocol, we will transcend failure and achieve some sort of permanent, invulnerable success.
But Love's Labor's Lost proves that building a fortress against your own humanity doesn't make you strong.
No.
It makes you incredibly fragile. Because the moment reality breaches the wall, the moment you fall in love or experience sudden grief or simply burn out.
You have no framework to process it. Your rigid system just shatters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the performative aspect of the language translates just as clearly.
We might not write in rigid sonnets, but look at how we use corporate jargon to avoid saying anything real.
Oh, yes.
An executive doesn't say, we failed and people will lose their jobs. They say, we are right-sizing our human capital footprint to synergize with evolving market paradigms.
It is literally Holofernes in a suit.
It so is.
Look at our motto in the play. He writes a letter to the king simply to report that he caught costard in the park.
Right.
But he cannot just state the fact. He spends an entire paragraph defining the time of day. He says, about the 6th hour, when beasts most graze, birds best peck, and men sit down to that nourishment which is called supper.
He is using language as a shield.
Exactly. He is trying to prove his own sophistication rather than communicate information.
And we do this constantly today.
We really do.
We use language to signal status. We curate the perfect, hyper-witty caption on a social media post just to prove how clever we are.
Or we drop obscure academic terms in a meeting to intimidate a colleague.
We even do it in our intimate relationships, like using therapy speak or intellectualized arguments to, quote-unquote, win a fight, rather than actually trying to understand the person sitting across from us.
We become, as Holofernes says, too picked, too spruce, too affected.
We become totally alienated from the raw reality of the interaction.
So if we accept that this performative intellect is a trap, we have to look at the practical application.
How do we spot the warning signs in our own lives?
Right. How do we audit our goals and our communication to ensure we aren't just building our own little academs?
I think the first step is what we could call the Barone audit.
I like that.
You have to look at the vows or the goals you've set for yourself, particularly around self-improvement or career ambition.
Okay.
Are your goals based on a fantasy version of yourself? Like, are you projecting a future where you never need a break, never get sick, never get distracted by emotional needs?
That requires an uncomfortable level of self-honesty, honestly.
It does.
The king's edict failed because it was fundamentally incompatible with his biology. If your plan for success requires you to suppress your basic human needs for connection, rest, and joy, your plan is structurally unsound.
You are attempting to master by might what cannot be mastered. The termite will eventually eat the foundation.
Yes. The second application is evaluating how we deploy our wit.
The Lords fail spectacularly in this play because they treat communication as a competitive sport rather than a bridge.
And the ultimate example of this failure is the Muscovite pageant in Act 5.
Yes, let's talk about the Muscovite pageant.
The mechanics of this pageant perfectly illustrate the danger of communicating to win.
Right.
The lords decide to woo the ladies, but they don't do it authentically at all. They dress up in elaborate disguises as Russians.
Naturally.
They bring a pre-written, highly formalized speech delivered by the page moth. They are operating entirely on script.
They want to execute a flawless performance and have the women just applaud their cleverness.
Exactly. But the women, the princess and her ladies, are operating in reality.
They catch wind of the prank.
And instead of playing along, they expose the emptiness of the men's performance. The ladies put on masks themselves, and they swap the specific love tokens the men had previously given them.
This is such a devastating tactical maneuver.
It is brilliant. The men enter completely focused on their own performance. They don't actually look at the women in front of them, right? They just look at the tokens to identify their targets.
And because the tokens have been swapped, the men end up passionately reciting their rehearsed, intimate vows to the wrong women.
It is the ultimate proof that the men are completely disconnected from reality.
They aren't in love with the women. They are in love with their own poetry.
They are talking to an audience, not a partner.
And the princess later tells them exactly why the performance failed. She says the women recognized it as a mocking intended game. They saw the men were just showing off.
So the reflection question for you here is profound. When you enter a high-stakes conversation, are you wearing a disguise?
Are you trying to deploy a pre-planned strategy to secure a victory? Or are you actually present in the room, reacting to the reality of the other person?
Right. The lords hid behind their masks and their massive vocabularies, and it rendered them entirely foolish. They talked past the people they claimed to love.
But the real turning point of this deep dive, and the reason these lessons about humility and reality are so incredibly difficult to apply, is that life doesn't usually correct us with a gentle comedic prank.
No, unfortunately it doesn't.
Reality usually shatters our illusions with profound, undeniable seriousness. And Shakespeare executes this disruption in one of the most shocking countercultural moments in the history of theater.
We really have to set the stage for how jarring this moment is.
Please do.
For 4.5 acts, we have been immersed in a comedy. The energy is chaotic, loud, and relentlessly clever.
Right.
The climax of this comedic energy is the pageant of the 9 wordies, where the lower-class characters are trying to put on a play, and the lords are ruthlessly heckling them.
The lords are using their massive intellects to humiliate people who are simply trying their best.
Exactly. The air is just thick with arrogant laughter.
And then right at the absolute peak of the noise, the stage direction is simply enter Marcade.
The tonal shift is instantaneous and violent.
Marcade is a messenger from France. The princess greets him, saying, "Welcome, Marcade, but that thou interruptest our merriment."
She can already feel the gravity he brings into the room.
And Marcade doesn't have a monologue. He doesn't use semantic dodgeball or Latin puns. He delivers his message in less than 2 sentences.
He says, "I am sorry, madam, for the news I bring is heavy in my tongue. The king your father."
And before he can even finish, the princess understands. She says, "Dead for my life."
Even so, my tale is told.
That's it. In 10 words, the entire artificial universe of Navar collapses.
It's breathtaking.
The wit, the sonnets, the heckling, the arrogant intellectual posturing, it all instantly evaporates. This is the invasion of grief, and it completely destabilizes the listener because it violates the fundamental contract of a comedy.
We are so conditioned to expect resolution.
Right, we expect the misunderstandings to be cleared up, the lovers to realize their true feelings, and the scene to end in a wedding.
And Barone explicitly acknowledges this broken formula. He says, "Our wooing doth not end like an old play. Jack hath not Jill. These ladies' courtesy might well have made our sport a comedy."
But the text is demanding that you face the reality that sickness and death cannot be wittied away.
No, they can't.
You cannot charm your way out of a terminal diagnosis. You cannot optimize your daily routine to avoid the loss of a parent. The arrival of Marcady is the ultimate proof that the little academe was always a lie. You cannot lock the world out.
And because the reality of death has entered the room, the women refuse to marry the men.
The men try to salvage the situation, though. The king immediately starts trying to use complex rhetoric to convince the princess to stay and fulfill the marriage contracts.
But the princess shuts him down entirely. She realizes that the men have spent the entire play demonstrating that their words have no weight.
They broke their oath to God regarding the academe, and they broke their promises of love during the Muscovite disguise.
She tells the king, "Your oath once broke, you force not to forswear."
Why on earth should she believe a vow of marriage from a man who treats words as cheap currency?
Exactly. She demands proof that their affection isn't just another performative game, and this leads to the pain of true penance.
The ladies dictate the terms of reality. They demand a year of asceticism, but not the fake, ego-driven asceticism of the opening act.
No, the king is ordered to a forlorn and naked hermitage to strip away his pride.
But the most revealing, psychologically devastating penance is the one Rosaline assigns to Barone.
Oh, this is the best part of the play.
Rosaline understands exactly how Barone's mind works. She knows his intellect is a weapon. She calls him a man replete with mocks.
He uses his brilliant mind to cut people down, to find the flaw in every argument, to assert his own superiority.
So she sentences him to spend 12 months in a hospital.
Let's look really closely at her exact command here.
Yeah.
She tells him to visit the speechless sick and to converse with groaning wretches. His task, every single day for a year, is to use all of his formidable wit, all of his linguistic brilliance, to force the pained impotent to smile.
And Barone is completely horrified. He says, to move wild laughter in the throat of death, it cannot be, it is impossible. Mirth cannot move a soul in agony.
He realizes immediately that his primary tool, his sarcasm, his cleverness, is completely useless in the face of genuine suffering.
And Rosaline's response is the moral fulcrum of the play. She says, a jest's prosperity lies in the ear of him that hears it, never in the tongue of him that makes it.
That concept that the value of your words is determined entirely by how they are received by the vulnerable person in front of you, that is shattering.
Modern listeners might balk at the severity of this punishment. I mean, a year in a 16th century plague ward seems incredibly harsh for being a bit too sarcastic.
It does seem harsh. But the philosophical value is profound. Rosaline is arguing that intellect, disconnected from empathy, is not just useless, it is cruel.
Right.
If your intelligence only serves to make you feel superior in a comfortable room, it has no real value. She forces Barone into the crucible of human suffering.
If he can take his brilliant mind into the darkest corners of existence and bring genuine comfort, then his wit has worth.
If he cannot, the hospital will force him to learn humility.
It's a demand that the head finally submit to the heart. You cannot heal a broken world with a clever quip. You have to sit with the groaning wretches. You have to be present in the pain.
However, as we synthesize this material, we really must practice wisdom and discernment.
Yes, definitely.
We are exploring a text from the late 1500s. While the ending achieves incredible emotional maturity, we cannot blindly endorse the entire structure of the play. We have to separate the enduring wisdom from the archaic packaging.
Absolutely. Going back to Hazlitt's critique, we have to admit that the execution of this play is often exhausting.
Extremely exhausting.
As much as we analyze the brilliance of the themes, sitting through the actual mechanics of the potentates of nonsense is a chore. The endless Latin puns, the excruciating scene where Holofernes and Dole spend 10 minutes arguing whether the deer the princess shot was a pricket or an old gray doe.
Oh, the pricket joke is a perfect example.
It goes on forever.
It does. A pricket is a buck in its second year. And the characters engage in this hyper-specific, relentless taxonomy of the Deer's Age, just drowning the scene in pedantry. It goes on and on. The prayful princess pierced and pricked, a pretty pleasing pricket.
The modern listener will almost certainly tune out.
They will. We don't have to pretend that every dense Peter Lombard-esque logical fallacy in this text is a stroke of unalloyed genius. It is exhausting, and it is perfectly fine to admit that.
In fact, feeling exhausted is part of Shakespeare's intended effect. You're supposed to feel the suffocating weight of this artificial language, even if Shakespeare indulges his own love of wordplay a bit too heavily in the process.
Right. We also have to critically discern the social assumptions that frame the narrative, particularly the initial view of women.
Right. The play opens with a legal decree that treats women as a toxic contagion.
They are banned within a mile of the court, a law rooted in deep, ancient misogynistic traditions that viewed the female body as the primary obstacle to male intellectual purity.
So the starting point is deeply prejudiced. But what makes the play fascinating is how aggressively it dismantles that starting premise.
It really does.
The text subverts the misogyny entirely. The women are the only characters operating in reality. They outsmart the men at every single juncture.
The princess and her ladies act as the anchors of truth. They refuse to be manipulated by the men's artificial sonnets.
They force the lords to abandon their taffeta phrases, silken terms precise, and demand they speak in russet yeas and honest kersey noes.
They demand plain, unvarnished truth.
They transition from being the banned, marginalized contagion to becoming the moral arbiters and the true teachers of the play. They dismantle the biodome and force the men to face the weather.
And this journey, from the sterile biodome to the messy reality of the hospital, connects to a much broader human struggle.
Right. The conflict in Navarre's court isn't just an Elizabethan satire. It is a universal tension found across centuries and cultures.
It is the eternal struggle between asceticism and earthly engagement. Throughout human history, in nearly every philosophical and religious tradition, there has been a powerful temptation to believe that ultimate truth resides outside the physical world.
The belief that if we just detach enough through fasting, vows, Stoic suppression, or modern digital optimization, we can transcend the pain of existence.
But Love's Labor's Lost makes the profound argument that the divine is actually found in the mess.
Baron realizes that locking yourself in a tower to study the light of truth only leaves you blind. You seal the biodome perfectly, and you simply suffocate on your own recycled air.
True illumination is relational. It requires engaging with the world, looking into the eyes of others, and accepting the inherent vulnerability of having a body that will eventually break and a heart that will eventually grieve.
The intellect is a magnificent tool, but when it attempts to operate independent of empathy and physical reality, it becomes a prison.
You cannot think your way out of being human.
You have to live it. You have to accept the chaotic reality of Costard and the maid. You have to accept the sudden, devastating arrival of Marcade. You have to let the termite eat the foundation, because the termite is you.
And if we look closely at our modern landscape, we really have to ask if we are just building new versions of Navarre's Academy.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over. We look at a 16th century king isolating himself with books and find it ridiculous.
Right.
But look at our relationship with our algorithms and curated digital feeds today.
Wow, yeah.
We surround ourselves with information that perfectly aligns with our preferences. We filter out the chaotic, contradictory, uncomfortable realities of human interaction in favor of a sterile, optimized, predictable digital environment.
We use artificial intelligence to draft our emails so we don't have to risk the vulnerability of finding our own words.
Are we using technology to finally perfect the king's impenetrable biodome? And if we are, when the algorithm fails, do we have the emotional resilience to survive the wilderness outside?
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.